Okay, welcome back, everyone, as we continue our Erev Tisha B'Av marathon, and we are sponsored by Baruch Ian Lilishmas Estebas Yoni Yaakov Chaim Ben Abba Avram and Shmuel HaKayin by A.B. Spry with the tefillah that all children should get into yeshiva easily. We learned from my shver Avigdor Aryeh Ben Rivka, you should have a refuah shalema b'sek shar chayil Yisrael. We are holding on the top of Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph as we welcome in Moshe Jacknin, joining us for our 32nd Zoomer of this wonderful evening. Top line of Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, Amar Rav Kahana Amar Rav. Rav Kahana says in the name of Rav an interesting chiddush. Cheresh, a deaf mute, sheyochel ledaber mitoich haksav, who can communicate with us through writing. So this is, by the way, obviously, if he was a deaf mute from birth, in those days before Helen Keller, there was no way to communicate with him. This must have been someone who was a pikeach and then became a deaf mute. So he could communicate with writing. So Rav Kahana says in the name of Rav, Cheresh, sheyochel ledaber mitoich haksav, if he could communicate with writing, Kaisvin v'noisnin get l'ishtay, could write and deliver a get to his wife. Amar Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef says, wonders, my kamash malan, what's the chiddush of Rav? Tanina, we learned, nishtatek, if a person becomes mute, v'amar loy nichtav get l'ishtay, should we write a get for your wife? Here can b'raishai, and he nods his head, bait k'naisai, we check him, Shloisha pa'amim, 3 times. Imam alav lav, if he answers 3 questions that are no, no, v'al hein, hein, and 3 questions that are yes, yes, harielu yichtavu v'yednu. So you see that we can do a communication without talking. So a deaf mute who could communicate with writing, it also seems to be a no-brainer. Amalei Reb Zera, so Reb Zera says, how you're comparing apples and oranges. Elaim Kamret, you're talking about a mute? Shani Elaim, a mute, is a bardas. A deaf person is a bardas. That can't be compared to a deaf mute who's considered less mentally competent. Shani Elaim, the Tanya Medaber Veina Shemeh, if he speaks and can't hear, Zel Cherish in Shas. If he hears and can't speak, zeu ilaim. Both of them, they are intelligent in all areas. How do we know that somebody who speaks and can't hear, he's called a cherish? And somebody who hears and can't speak, zeu ilaim, he's called a mute. How do we know the definitions? So that's based on a pasuk in Tehillim. I am like one who is deaf and cannot hear. And like one who is mute and lo yiftach who can't open his mouth. The etymology of Elaim is k'de emrei inshe. Elaim is an acronym for ishtakel milule. His words are taken away. The aleph is ishtakel, it's taken away. And the lam and mem is milule. His words are taken away. Reb Zera says, no, this is what's bothering me. Because we have a rule with Eidos. The Tanya, imlo yagid, if a person knows testimony and he doesn't relate it, v'nasa avoina, you can't hide testimony. So, but it says, imlo yagid, if he doesn't relate, prat le'ilaim, that excludes a mute, she'eni yachal hagid. But why can't he do it according to you? Why can't he communicate by writing? Amai ha yachal hagid mitoich haksav. He can communicate by writing. Amalei Abayis, so Abayis says, Eidus ka'amret. You're talking about testimony? Testimony is something different. Shani Eidus, when it comes to official testimony in court, the Rachman Amar, it says, Mipiem v'loi mipik sovim. It has to be from their mouth and not from writing. Meisvei, Kishem shebait kinoisei legittin, if somebody is mute, just like we check his nodding the head, if it's accurate, kach bait can I say l'masayis l'matanis for business, or l'idiyas for testimony, or l'yerushas and for inheritance. But it says, you see, we rely on him for idiyas. Ketani mia idiyas, even though we're writing, right? So, even though it's not from the mouth. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef bar Yumi, what do we mean by edus? That's edus that a husband died, that a wife shouldn't be an aguna. Amar Rav Sheshes be'edus isha, that's testimony about a woman remarrying. The Akilu Rabbanan, there the Rabbanan were lenient that she shouldn't be an aguna. I v'ketani Yerushas. So you see, you're giving testimony about somebody's inheritance. Says Gemara, no, he's not giving testimony about others. It's about himself, that he could say, you know what, I don't want my firstborn to get a double portion. That he could motion with his head that he doesn't want his firstborn to get a double portion. But it says for business, doesn't that mean for business for others? My lav alma, for others, that he could testify about others. Loyla day, it only means for his own gifts and his own business, but not for others. Meisvei, so the Gemara asks, and this seems to be a knockout blow to Rav. Cheresh, a deaf mute, we don't go after his gesticulation, or the movement of his mouth, or after his writing, only by movables, but not by Gittin. So you see, this is clearly not like Rav. Now the Gemara could have said over here, like it does in other places in Shas, Rav Tanahu Palak. The Rav himself straddled the era of the Amoraim and the Tanoim, and he could argue. But the Gemara doesn't need to say that, because it's actually prior Machlokes Tanoim. Tanoi. It's actually a Machlokes Tanoim. The Tanya, Amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Ba'med v'amamurim b'cheresh me'ikrai, where he's a deaf mute from the get-go. Remember we said, a deaf mute from the get-go, before the time of Helen Keller, there was really no way to educate a deaf mute. But if he was intelligent and then became a deaf mute, who kaisiv? So now, since he knows how to write, who kaisiv? He could write the get, v'heim chaisman, and witness is consigned. However, the cheresh me'ikra loy, but a cheresh from the get-go not. However, kishem shekoinsa b'remiza, if he got married, this is a question, excuse me. The cheresh me'ikra loy, but if he was a cheresh from the get-go, he cannot do it b'remiza. Don't we have a rule that if he got married through a hint, he could divorce through a hint? Kishem shekoinsa b'remiza, just like he married her with a hint, because that's a din d'Rabbanan, kach moitzia b'remiza. Says Gemara, you're right. If it's his wife, then just like he married her with gesticulation, he could divorce her with gesticulation. The problem is where he married her and then he died and she falls to a yavam. Hakanami. Hakabamayas b'yavimtai. So the Gemara says, well, yavimtai miman. If Ruvain married Sarah and Ruvain dies childless and Sarah falls to Shimon, so from whom? If she fell from Ruvain was a cheresh, and therefore he was mekadesh her with gesticulation, and now Shimon is also a cheresh, well, kishem sheknisasa b'remiza, just like the original marriage was through hinting, kach yitziasa b'remisa. Oh, you know where he can't divorce her with gesticulation? That's where Ruvain was a cherish, Ruvain was a pikeach. So he married her midoraisa, with talk. And now Shimon is a cherish, ella de nafule me achiv pikeach. In that case, then he can't divorce her with a gesticulation, because she was married with words, and he can't dissolve that with a gesticulation. But we make a gezerah. It fell from a brother who was a cherish. However, in other words, really, if Ruvain was a cherish, and Ruvain died, and Sarah falls to Shimon, who's also a cherish, so Shimon should be able to send her away with gesticulation, because she got into the original marriage with Ruvain with gesticulation. However, we're afraid, since maybe Ruvain would be a pikeach, so we're going to cherish out to pikeach. Says the Gemara, Ihaki ishtoinami, then he shouldn't be able to send away his wife either because of a gzeira. Yevimtai be yevimtai michlafa. He'll mix up one yavama with another yavama, but ishtai be yevimtai like michlafa. His wife with the yavama we won't mix up. So now the Gemara is going to prove to us from Masechtas Yavamas a little piece of Yavamas now, because Mark says he's getting so tired of these easy Gemaras. So a little, Mark, this is special for you, a piece of Yavamas. Don't be angry at me, Rabbi, say it's only because of Mark. I would have gone on with medicine Gemara, but Mark said he's had it. And he only takes antibiotic for 10 days, not more than that. Says the Gemara, do we make a gzeira? We're going to see conclusively that where the original husband was a cheresh, or the original husband had any kind of kiddushin d'Rabbanan, so then the yavam can send away with gesticulation, and we don't make a gzeira. So mikazvina cheresh ot bikeach. Vatanan, as we start the top of Ayin Aleph from Beis. Now, let me remind you, Rabbi Yisai, because it's been a little while from Yavamas, and if Ruvain is married to Sarah and Ruvain dies, and Sarah falls to Shimon, but Sarah was Shimon's niece, let's say, right? Excuse me, but Sarah was Shimon's daughter, because Ruvain married his niece. So of course Sarah is patam in yibam and chalitza, because you can't be miyabam an erva, somebody is forbidden. Now, therefore, if Ruvain and Shimon, two brothers, married two sisters, Ruvain and Shimon married Rachel and Leah. If Ruvain dies, so Rachel falls to Shimon. Shimon can't marry her because it's achayis ishtai. So Rachel is part from Yiban Machalitza. Now, if both Ruvain and Shimon have marriages with the two sisters that are rabbinical marriages, and the Gemara gives us two cases, a bunch of cases. Vatanan, we learned this in Yavamis. We learned it more recently in the Chok, when we learned the parak in Chok. Vatanan, Shnei Achen Chershin. If Reuven and Shimon were both deaf mutes. Now, no matter then what Rachel and Leah are, the marriage is only d'Rabbanan. Makes no difference if Rachel and Leah are both Chershes, if Rachel and Leah are both Pikkin, or if Rachel and Leah is one Chershes and one Pikkin. It makes no difference. Because since both husbands are Cherish, the marriage is only d'Rabbanan. So Shnei Achen Chershin, two brothers that are deaf mute, Reuven and Shimon are deaf mute, Nesuin Shtei Ach is Pikkais, whether Rachel and Leah are healthy, or Shtei Ach is Chershes, or Rachel and Leah are both deaf mutes, or Shtei Ach is Achas Pikkas, Achas Chershes, or Rachel is a Pikkach, and Leah is deaf mute, it makes no difference, because since both husbands are deaf mute, their marriages are all D'Rabbanan. Or the other way around. If both wives are deaf mutes, so then we don't care what Reuven and Shimon are. V'chein shtei achoyes, two sisters, Rachel and Leah, chershes. So now both marriages are D'Rabbanan because of the wives. Nesuas l'shnei achen, if they're married to Reuven and Shimon who are both pikin, are healthy, or l'shnei achen chershin, or they're both deaf mutes, or l'shnei achen echad pikach v'echad cheresh, or one is healthy and one is deaf mute. It makes no difference. Because since both wives are deaf mutes, both marriages are D'Rabbanan. If Reuven dies, so his marriage with Rachel was only D'Rabbanan, and Shimon's marriage with Leah is only D'Rabbanan. So since they're of the same strength, and Rachel and Leah are sisters, so therefore, Peturas min ha-chalitza min ha-yibum. Rachel is pater from a chalitza and yibum, because she's achos ishtai to Shimon. The imo yonochriyos, if instead of Rachel and Leah being sisters, they were strangers, yikansu. So then Yibum has to be performed. Now Yibum has to be performed because Chalitza can't be performed because one of them is a Cherish or a Cherishes, and you have to say a formula. And since they can't say the formula, they can't do Chalitza. So yikansu, they have to do Yibum. V'imrotzu loitzion yoitziu. If they want a divorce, since the marriage with Reuven initially was D'Rabbanan, so therefore they could divorce also Beremiza midrabbanan. So you see that you could divorce midrabbanan, you're not geyser cherish ata pekeach. Ela machvarta kedishanin meikara. It's better, like we explained earlier, that what's the case where we say that that you cannot divorce her beremiza. That's where Reuven was a pikeach. If Reuven was initially a pikeach, and now Shimon is a cherish, so since the marriage was with marriage d'oraisa, only then you can't divorce with gesticulation. Now, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Chalukin alav chaveirav al Rab Shimon Gamliel. Remember, Rab Shimon Gamliel says it's only by a cherish may ikrai. But a cherish that was a deaf mute that once was healthy, he could divorce with writing. Says the Rabbi Yochanan, Rab Shimon Gamliel argues on his colleagues. His colleagues hold that a deaf mute cannot divorce with writing. Rabbi Afanan Nami Tanina. We learned also nishtis. If a woman becomes an imbecile, lo yotzi, you can't divorce her. Nischarishu, if he becomes a deaf mute, oy nishtata, or he becomes an imbecile, that means he was once healthy. Lo yotzi oilamis. My oilamis, what does it mean? He could never divorce her. Lav afal gav de yochel ledaber mitoich haksav. Even though he could communicate with writing. So you see that the Rabbanan argue on Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Papa. So Rabbi Papa says, look, he loved the Ashmi'in on Rabbi Yochanan. If Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't have told us this, Havamina, I would have thought Rabbi Shimon Gamliel lefrushe time in the Tanakama doasa. That Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is explaining the Tanakama. That when the Tanakama says a cherish cannot divorce, it's talking about a cherish meyikrai. But a one that was healthy and then became a cherish could divorce biksav. Umay oilamis, what does it mean that he could never give a get? It doesn't mean if he writes it. It means afal gab de chazina le de charif, even if you see that he's sharp, he cannot divorce with a gesticulation. But he could divorce with writing. Inami, the reason why it says lo yotza ilamis is coming to contrast it with the case of the woman that becomes an imbecile. The woman that becomes an imbecile, really she should be able to be divorced. Because we don't need her das. She's divorced against her will. The reason why we say she's not divorced is because otherwise, who's going to take care of her? People are going to be noig minikefker. Ma'ashe enkein a cheresh can never ilamis. It's not because we're worried. It's because we need his das, and without, he's a deaf mute, he doesn't have das. Inamik look at Reb Yitzchak. Dam Reb Yitzchak, dvar Torah, shaita miskareshes. A woman that becomes an imbecile, you could divorce her. Why? Because we don't need her acceptance. It's like an intelligent woman that's divorced against her will. Why do we say she's not divorced? Because then nobody will take care of her. So we tell them, once you're married to her, you have to take care of her. Otherwise, who's going to take care of her? Now, says the next Mishnah, amazing. It's 55 minutes and we're almost finished, Rabbi say. Unbelievable. 2 blatters, special siyata d'shmaya. Special siyata d'shmaya. We want to do the right thing and not fall behind. Because, again, that's another thing that Mark says. No falling behind. Us Bela kinwid people, we don't want to fall behind. The Ruvain Palak also doesn't want to fall behind. Ruvain, in this year we haven't been behind much. Baruch Hashem, it's a special siyata d'shmaya from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Ruvain, even when Mim Libby was suffering for 2.5 years, I don't think we fell behind. I don't think we fell behind.
I don't remember falling behind.
What?
I don't remember you falling behind.
B'li ayin hara. It's a special siyata d'shmaya from the Rebbeinu Shalom. So now, Zok the Heilige Mishnah, Amru loy nichtav get le'ishtecha. They say to Chatzkel, well, let's see. Eddie says to Chatzkel, should we write a get for your wife? And Eddie, together with Mel, should we write? Well, no. Amrulay, Eddie and Mel say to Chatzkel, Nichtav get le'ishtecha, should we write a get for your wife? V'amalan ksuvu. And Chatzkel says to Eddie and Mel, write it. So Amru l'Seifer v'Kasaf, if Eddie and Mel tell a cipher to write it, ula eidim v'chasmu, and to witnesses and sign it, afal pi shekasvu v'chasmu, even though a person wrote it and witnesses signed it, v'nasnu lo, and they gave it back to Chatzkel, v'chazav v'nasnu lo, and he gave it to his wife, Hari, I get batel, because he told Mel and Eddie to do it. Ad sheyoyma l'seifer kasav, unless Chatzkel tells the cipher to write it, or le'edem chasumu, and the witnesses to sign it. Now we have 2 issues over here. One issue is that Chatzkel didn't tell him to give it. He just said to write it. So that's one issue. There's another issue if milei mimser and l'shliach, if words can be passed over to other people. So the Gemara says, first suggest, Taima deloy amar tnu. It's only because Chatzkel did not say to give it. He said that they should write it. So therefore we assume that Chatzkel is embarrassed for anyone else to know that he doesn't know how to write a get. Taima deloy amar tnu. Ha amar tnu. But if he says, give it, then Neistin. So the Gemara says, man, use this Rameiri, Dama Mile Mimsun L'Shliach, that you can hand over words to someone else. Ema Sefer, at Shiyomel Sefer, Kasav Edim Chaisma Chasumu. It's only if he tells the Sefer, write it, and the witness is to sign it. But if he said Tnu, it's not enough. Asam Rabbi Yaisi, Dama Mile Lo Mimsun L'Shliach. You can't give over in verbal instructions. So Reisha Rameir v'Sefer Rabbi Yaisi, is the Reisha Rameir and the Sefer Rabbi Yaisi in? Reisha Rameir v'Sefer Rabbi Yaisi. Abaye says no. Kula Rameir. It's all going according to Rabbi Meir that Milei Mimsun L'Shliach. V'hacha b'mayaskinan d'lo yamat tanu. And the Mishnah is only talking about where he didn't say give it. He said write it. And if he says write it, that implies that you have to write it yourself, because I'm embarrassed for anybody else to know. So the Gemara says, it shouldn't say until he tells the Sefer to write it. It should say until he says give it over. He didn't say 3 people. If you say it to 3 people, then you're making them a bezdin, and then they can instruct others. But if you say it to 2, even if you say tnu, they have to do it to themselves. They can't give it over to others. Says the Gemara, it should say until he says it to 3. It's all going according to Rabbi Yaisi, that milei loy mimseren l'shliach. And how this is going to play out, we're going to learn on Motzi Tisha B'Av Be'ezus Hashem at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, Motzi Tisha B'Av, after everybody has their coffee and their babka, and for some people, like Shelley, something stronger, right? And then we'll resume. I want to wish everybody an easy fast. Don't go away now, Rabbi said, because we're going to learn the Mishnah Yomim.